All right. Good morning, everyone. It's so exciting to be moderating this great panel. My name is Sergio Rivas. I am the regional representative for ACDI VOCA in Latin America. One of the challenges that we all as development practitioners face is seeking sustainable solutions. To do that, we try to elicit and sustain meaningful local participation. Local ownership is so important that, for example, when USAID Administrator Samantha Power outlined the agency's new vision for global development last November, she announced two ambitious targets that in the next 4 years, 25% of USAID's assistance will go to local partners, and that 50% of USAID's programming will be driven by local communities. This is big and this is bold. We have the fortune of having with us today three complementary and practical views into having local actors engaged and tapping local ownership in economic development efforts. Let me introduce our first panelist. Dr. Jim Barnhart is the assistant to the administrator in USAID's Bureau for Resilience and Food Security. Dr. Barnhart has previously served as mission director for USAID in Jordan, Albania, and Lebanon. He was also associate mission director in Pakistan. His earlier overseas assignments include Zambia and Jordan, supervising economic growth, agriculture, education, and democracy and governance programs. And before joining USAID, Dr. Barnhart worked in Egypt and the West Bank, Gaza, supporting programs for educational and economic development, as well as coordinating activities for an American NGO that operated in Armenia, Turkey, and Jerusalem. He's traveled throughout the Middle East, including Syria and Oman, and has studied Arabic in Damascus and the Birzeit University outside of Ramallah. Jim, welcome. It's a great pleasure to have you. I think it's particularly important to start our panel with a donor perspective. In all of your previous positions, you've dealt with private sector engagement, but something I did not mention in your introduction is that you are also the Deputy Coordinator for Development for Feed the Future, which is the US government's global hunger and food security initiative. This is tremendously important. Please tell us how you're seeing engagement with local actors and how this is working.
Well, good morning, Sergio, and everyone. It's great to be here. I'm thrilled to be a part of this panel, and to be really, I think, elevating and putting on the spotlight USAID's efforts to put local organizations as change agents at the center of everything that we do. You know, as Administrator Power has stated, we know that localization it's more than making awards to local partners. It's about building local voices and leadership into all aspects of our programs, no matter with whom we work. So we have an opportunity as members of the international development community to think creatively about how we create space for local people and their communities, and for them to exercise leadership and influence on where, how, and for what purpose we invest together in development programs. You know, as you heard from Administrator Power this morning, USAID is committed to reform how we support and catalyze the leaders, organizations, networks, and institutions that are vital for driving change in communities around the world. You know, you mentioned those two targets, right? They are, as you said, they are big and they are ambitious, and they really are important to helping drive what we're trying to get done. That first of that target, 25% of our programs directly to local partners within the next 4 years. We know that development is more effective when resources are managed closer to the communities they serve. And by putting local partners at the core of our programs, we help ensure that goals are not just means to an end, but they're sustainable, they're equitable, and they're inclusive. You know, in particular, inclusive development is critical to the understanding and success of this work. And it means that every person, regardless of identity, is instrumental in the transformation of their own societies. And their inclusion throughout the development process leads to better outcomes. Local actors, including women, youth, LGBTQI+, persons with disabilities, indigenous peoples, and others who've been marginalized in their countries, are important, critical partners in achieving our localization vision. And that second target you mentioned, the one about co-designing projects, setting priorities, driving implementations in half of our programs by 2030 is again a big one. It's going to require a lot of work on our part, but it's really important. And with these two shifts in our approach, that we're going to build upon the knowledge, priorities, and aspirations of individuals and support them in driving sustainable changes within their communities. It's not a new idea. Localization is not new. We've been talking about this for some time. And I've worked around the world, as you mentioned, trying to figure out creative ways of promoting stronger local ownership in the countries in which I've worked. And right now, as you said, in Feed the Future, as the development co-coordinator for the Feed the Future program, we are really trying to figure out how we can do better at that. And one of the great examples we have, in Bangladesh, the Bangladesh Agriculture University is one of our partners with our post-harvest loss innovation lab. They've successfully developed a low-cost dryer that smallholder farmers are able to use instead of the traditional sun-drying methods. And it's drying over half a ton of rice in less than 5 hours. And it ensures that grains are well dried and therefore won't risk rot in fermentation and storage. And it would obviously rendering them unusable. And it saves farmers valuable time. Instead, they can focus efforts on reaping the highest prices for grains in the marketplace, or opt to store them for their family's consumption, or sell at a later time when prices are higher. And it's part of our Feed the Future Innovation Lab that we've partnered in having Bangladesh University lead this effort. And our innovation labs are drawing expertise from top US universities and then reaching out to partner institutions around the world in developing country research capacity across the world. So we've also seen positive outcomes through our flagship locally led program, what we call Local Works. And it's through an annual competition. USAID missions around the world are equipped with funding to develop and test flexible solutions to overcome operational challenges. And it's all about locally owned development. So with these additional resources, tools, and opportunities through the program, our missions in the field can pursue new approaches that are flexible, they're locally responsive, and they're sustainable. I've got other examples, but I think I know the other panelists, so I don't want to take up all the time. But I do want to say that our updated global food security strategy, which which we launched recently, is the integrated U.S. government approach to end global hunger, poverty, and malnutrition. And it's through the Feed the Future initiative. And within that, we are emphasizing in doubling down really on equity and inclusion as a new priority area. The strategy outlines actions for collaboration with local partners to address challenges to inclusion and intentionally engage all who can contribute to and benefit from inclusive growth. Co-creation is a core tenet in our engagement with local partners. I think I'll stop there for the moment, Sergio, because again, there are others, and let's continue the panel. Back to you.
Fantastic. Thank you, Jim. Great examples. And as a manager, two things resonate strongly in me. That the fact that projects are more than the awards and catalyzing local leaders. Don't we think about that every week in our jobs? Let me now introduce our second panelist, Dr. Corey O'Hara. He is the country director for IDE in Nepal. Corey is an agriculture and nutrition professional specializing in ethical sourcing and value creation for smallholder farmers. Corey serves as editor-in-chief of the Food and Nutrition Bulletin, a peer-reviewed academic journal focused on global nutrition and human security. Before joining IDE, Corey worked in the Department of State, at Wingbrook International, and at the Clinton Global Initiative. Hello, Corey. Welcome. Let me add to that brief introduction that we know that you founded and coordinated the Haiti Action Network, which is a multi-sector group of actors engaged in long-term development, recovery, and reconstruction efforts. Your experience creating partnerships also includes working in Nepal, Cambodia, and Bhutan. So the whole discussion about engaging local actors is by no means new to you. Your perspective on this panel on local engagement, though, is on direct engagement at the grassroots level. Please tell us about your experience with using rural community centers to unleash a multitude of social and economic processes.
Thanks so much for that introduction, Sergio. That was yeah, great. Thank you. I would say a lot of the work that we do in Nepal to improve rural livelihoods centers around improving farmers' access to markets. That's one of the prime constraints for smallholders in Nepal. So we help farmers to establish produce, what we call collection centers, which then can become a hub or a focal point for other kinds of activities. But I'd prefer to let the farmers say more about that in their own words. I think we have a video, Bob.
नमस्कार, मेरो नाम शारदा खत्री। म किसान हो। म हाम्रो ताजा तरकारी सङ्कलन केन्द्रको उपाध्यक्ष। हामीले तरकारी जम्मैले एकै ठाउँमा सङ्कलन गर्छौं। सङ्कलन गर्नको फाइदा चाहिँ 1 किलो 2 किलो भए पनि त हाम्रो अब कहिले सिमी 1 किलो हुन्छ, कहिले अब खुर्सानी 1 किलो हुन्छ। त्यो 1 किलो 2 किलो लिएर जान टाढा बजार लिएर जान गाह्रो हुन्थ्यो। यही सबैले सजिलो, समयको पनि बचत अनि थोरै पनि हामीले व्यापार बेच्न पाउने भएर हामीलाई कलेक्सन सेन्टरको हामीलाई एकदम के भन्ने फाइदा। अब मैले मुक्तिनाथ विकास ब्याङ्कबाट अनि तरकारी सङ्कलन केन्द्रबाट हाम्रो मैले लोन लिएको थिएँ। अब यो तरकारी बेचेर अब कोही लोन तिरियो। अब यो तरकारीबाट उत्पादन भएको पैसामा मैले आफ्नो घर खर्ची अनि छोराछोरीलाई पढाउने।
हामीलाई यो सङ्कलन केन्द्र पहिला सुरुमा चाहिँ हामीले 72 सालबाट सुरु गरेको। पहिला चाहिँ यो सङ्कलन केन्द्र थिएन। पहिला आफआफ्नै तरिकाले काँक्रा चाहिँ डोकेलाई अथवा बजार लगेर बेच्नु पर्ने अवस्था थियो। जब यो सङ्कलन केन्द्र चाहिँ सुरु भइसकेपछि यहाँको चाहिँ किसानहरूलाई चाहिँ सहज भएको छ। किनभने हामीलाई 1 किलो 2 किलो भए पनि हामी यो सङ्कलन केन्द्रमा ल्याएर चाहिँ दिन पाएका छौँ। 1 किलो लिएर हामी बजार जानलाई चाहिँ हामीलाई समस्या थियो। अहिले चाहिँ हाम्रो चाहिँ सजिलो छ। जस 1-2 किलो हुनेले पनि यहाँ चाहिँ ल्याएर चाहिँ सङ्कलन गर्न पाउँछ। हामी चाहिँ यसमा चाहिँ आबद्ध भनेको टोटल अहिले चाहिँ यहाँबाट खालैसँग 150 घरधुरी जुकै हामी चाहिँ यसबाट चाहिँ फाइदा लिएको छौँ।
Thanks for that. Just to add, I think a little bit on top of what the farmers have shared, these collection centers serve as an intermediary market, a point of connection between farmers, obviously an aggregation point, but a point of connection between farmers and traders. But they also become a hub for other kinds of activities. And I think that's where the real localization and local ownership comes in. We work with the farmers to elect a marketing and planning committee. That elected committee designs a cropping calendar to coordinate production for the community. That helps the farmers to make sure they're bringing their produce to market at the right point to get the highest possible prices. We can also use the cropping calendar to make sure that farmers are getting access to agricultural inputs at the right time, getting seeds at the beginning of the season, irrigation supplies, integrated pest management tools at the right point to be maximally useful. The community can also use the centers as a central point for post-harvest handling and processing, grading and sorting, obviously, but also other kinds of processing. For instance, I'm really interested to learn more about this low-cost dryer that's been developed in Bangladesh, because drying is a major function also of the collection centers. But then we can also use them as a training center. So we as an organization can then use that established entity to provide additional services over time. So for example, recently we started a program to establish community-managed composting enterprises that are tied to the collection centers. Nepal has a chronic and severe fertilizer deficit, and rural smallholders find it nearly impossible to get access to commercial fertilizers, particularly for high-value vegetable production. The fertilizer that's available tends to be reserved for rice or corn. The situation became much worse during the COVID lockdowns also. So we've really seen that local production of high quality compost has huge benefits for community resilience. But the important piece here is that that elected marketing and planning committee really takes ownership over all of those different functions. In other words, the collection center really starts out life with a primary function of improving market access, but they very quickly become a vehicle for other resilience building activities that can be managed sustainably by the community itself over time.
Fantastic, Corey. Thank you very much. So it's all about breaking barriers, right? The barrier of having just a few kilos that was not allowing thousands and hundreds of families to access the market, and through that, accessing other stuff. That's great. To complement the discussion, we have a pre-recorded session from Ms. Nicole Marder in Honduras. She is the managing partner at Minister Suites Hotel in Tegucigalpa. She is a board member of the National Chamber of Tourism of Honduras. She is also the former Secretary of Tourism of the government of Honduras. In her career in the private sector, she has served as president of the Hotel Association of Honduras, president of the Latin American Federation of Small Hotels, and president of the Inter-American and Caribbean Network of Small Businesses. So high performance career in the private sector. Recognizing that engagement is also a two-way street, her discussion is about the commitment necessary from those local actors that we want to engage with. How can they better be prepared to reap the benefits from development initiatives? And what are some of the most important behaviors and incentives for mutual benefit? Let's see the video, please. Bob.
Hello, Sergio, and thank you very much. It's a great honor to be here with you and everybody present. Well, in the case of tourism, when we say local actors, we need to understand that this is a highly structured sector in Honduras. This is the greatest advantage that we have over almost any other economic sector in our country. It's kind of like our superpower. The private sector is articulated under one big umbrella, the National Chamber of Tourism, which has 22 regional and local chapters and 7 subsector associations represented on the board. But essentially, we have one voice and we act united when the opportunity requires. On the other hand, the public sector is represented by only one entity, the Honduran Institute of Tourism. So when we say coordinating with the government, we just have one institution to deal with, which makes it kind of simple. Now, tourism is not only a great source of employment, but the development of eco and agro-tourism allows Hondurans to stay home with their families in the rural communities with a better quality of life rather than migrating to the bigger cities or to other countries looking for job opportunities. However, tourism is very sensitive to crisis. For years, our threats have been social unrest or a negative country image, which makes it a big challenge when we try to showcase and market our beautiful tourism destinations internationally. So, besides the obvious benefits of collaboration, having a highly structured sector has allowed us to take full advantage of partnering with USAID. Throughout the years, we've seen development projects bringing much necessary resources and important support to Honduras, but they usually bring their own agendas, sometimes alien to the real needs of our industry. Looking back at the 4 years we've been working with transforming market systems, the first characteristic that I can mention is the ability to listen. As the industry partners that we are, we knew very clearly what we wanted and what we needed. And TMS had the ability to listen. They allowed us to drive the strategy. And listening means hearing what the industry has to say and allowing everybody to express themselves. However, it's also the ability to listen to everything that is happening around to really understand the needs and create a vision together. This can only be achieved when the development specialists of the project come from the private sector as well, which was our case here in Honduras with TMS. This is what made the local actors look at USAID differently. not just like any other actor, but as a true partner. The second characteristic is the flexibility to adapt. As we were making strides on cleaning the misinformation that existed online about Honduras, including false and outdated articles declaring San Pedro Sula as the murder capital of the world, we found that there wasn't enough tourism information coming from the private sector, and we needed companies to engage in this effort. This is something that we did not consider initially, but we learned in the way. And we needed the support of USAID to quickly implement a training program, as we did. The capacity to analyze new information as it comes and be able to adapt the project activities accordingly is key to getting closer to the real needs of the private sector and guarantee success for the project. When COVID struck, close to 150,000 jobs were lost in a matter of weeks. Just 8 months later, when we were getting ready for the tourism high season in Honduras, 2 hurricanes struck and gave the last hit to another 100,000 jobs, putting tourism on its worst crisis ever. Nothing illustrates this flexibility like USAID's support to react faster to the pandemic and have greater impact than any other sector. With TMS, we developed a sector-wide crisis management manual. Together, we negotiated legislation for an employment protection program, making government resources available for small businesses to maintain their payroll and hire back employees. We launched 8 different subsector biosecurity protocols and over 200 online courses. Thanks to all of this, more than 5,000 MSMEs survived and maintained visitation, allowing tourism to be the first sector eligible for the government's Intelligent Reactivation Program in June of 2020. And we negotiated a sector-specific guarantee fund that raised $75 million for small tourism companies to reinvest and reactivate their businesses. The third characteristic that I'd like to point out today is that as private sector, we need projects to be sustainable beyond their lifespan, to guarantee the ongoing growth of our industry, and to secure not only our livelihoods, but those of more than 500,000 workers that depend on tourism in Honduras. When USAID truly partners with the private sector, sustainability is not only their indicator, it's our indicator as an industry as well. During this process, we had setbacks and successes. Private enterprises evolved, failed, and learned. As large as a development project might be, compared to the realities and challenges of an entire country, their funding is small. So we all need to treat it as a delicate opportunity to make meaningful interventions and make the best out of this. It is the responsibility of all involved, the project, private sector, and public authorities. And it all starts with the willingness to listen to each other and to work together. Thank you very much.
All right. Powerful messages from the private sector, from the horse's mouth. It's all about listening and adapting, but on their side, it helped a lot in Honduras to have a cohesive and organized private sector to reap those benefits. We have a few minutes now to discuss some questions and additional comments from Corey and from Jim. I'd like to start. There's a question from Bianca Cecilia Gonzalez about co-creation. We talked about diversity, equity, and inclusion. What is co-creation, and how does that work to overcome barriers? I don't know, Jim, would you like to take the first cut at that question?
Sure. And I think that the nice, can you hear me? Yes, you can.
Yes.
The nice thing about co-creation is that it is a flexible tool depending on where you are in the world and what that looks like. The way that I have used co-creation opportunities in the field and from where I sit is that you come into this way using the last speaker's first tool, right? Listening and really going into a design of a program. So this isn't, let me take a step back and say, look, the way we've always done programs in USAID, and I think with the donor community writ large, is we have absolute experts in the field. We have partners, and we do our best to design programs and projects based upon engagements with teams and with partners, private sector, public sector in the field. And that's a good way to do business, but a co-creation process takes that one step further. And it says, rather than consulting or discussing with your partners, you bring them into the room while you're actually working, designing the program, right? You do the analysis of the problem set together. And then if you can agree upon what the general problem set is, and I loved her phrase at the end there, delicate opportunity, right? We're not talking about large amounts of money to address major development or challenges that any particular country or community faces. And so you definitely want to agree on what the problem set is, and then figure out what are the best tools, mechanisms to address that particular set of problems. And you are far more likely to get to her third goal of sustainability in the project if you all agree on the problem set, and then you're a part of working together with your potential implementers, host country partners, but also international partners on what that looks like. And so that's generally what co-creation is all about. It is that first her very first point that she made on listening and bringing diverse voices, perspectives to the table, not only to listen, but to actually be agents of change themselves and helping to design that solution. So hope that makes sense.
Absolutely, it does. And Corey, you went even a step further in not only listening, but having the local people through an elected committee to run the community hubs. What's your reaction on this co-creation and on Nicole Marder's video?
Thanks. I think co-creation in many ways is, well, as Jim said, it's a flexible tool. And I think listening, as Jim also mentioned, is really at the heart of it. I think in many ways, it is just a part of how we have to do things now. I think 15 years ago, 20 years ago, the development sector looked very different. There was a lot more of a top-down approach. Nowadays, we have to involve local stakeholders, and that means the private sector. That means bringing farmers into the discussion from the beginning. That means local nonprofit organizations. In Nepal, we do a lot of the implementation through local nonprofits. We see that as a really important way to build up the capacity internally within Nepal to be able to continue this the kind of change that we're involved in and that we're trying to make happen in Nepal. That's only going to happen if we can really build up that local capacity. So I think it's just how we have to do things these days. It's the right way to go. I think very importantly, I think if you are not actually talking to the farmers in the design of your project, you're just kind of doing it wrong. You're missing out on a critical voice. And that does mean talking to women farmers as well as the men who might have a louder voice. It means identifying the needs of disabled persons within rural communities who might be left out of these systems altogether, but certainly have an important role to play. So really making sure that you're hearing as many voices as possible within that process.
Absolutely.
Can I just, Sergio, build on what Corey was just saying?
Yes, please.
I think we can be honest with ourselves, those of us that have been in the field for decades, that we have enjoyed a wealth of experience and built a wealth of expertise. And it is rather, it's easy for all of us to be dropped into a particular situation and start applying the things that we have learned from different parts of our career and what's worked and what hasn't, to start coming up with very quickly the solutions. And I think the whole point of co-creation is being a little more humble than that. And it is about, taking that step back and as Corey says, making sure those farmers are at the table with you. And you better be ready as the development professional to hear something that you don't agree with. And that's okay, right? And you can then have a robust discussion, right? Partnership's not about, as Corey said, we've done a lot of top down, right? So we have taken our expertise and wanted to apply it in places where maybe it didn't make as much sense in the past. We're doing our best to get away from that with really doubling down on localization and co-creation as one of the ways that we get at it. But it does mean that we need to be ready to hear things that maybe we don't agree with, but then have a discussion, because partners don't always agree. In fact, I think a partnership where you're always agreeing is not a very healthy partnership. There's really something good about creative conflict. And so having robust discussion with partners, and making sure that all those voices are at the table and feel empowered to tell you when they think you're wrong is really important. And that takes time. That's not an easy thing to do, both culturally, institutionally, but then also making sure that your partners around the world are empowered to push back.
That is absolutely true. It takes time. It takes so much time that I think in order to add to this discussion on co-creation in particular, co-creation is sometimes thought as the design process, a previous process to something that will happen later. In our case, in Honduras, the project that we're running, we consider co-creation from the very moment we conceive an idea to the moment we start implementation and to the moment we actually do evaluation. So co-creation is throughout. It doesn't have a beginning and an end. And that's, when you conceptualize co-creation in that matter, it opens up your ears and your mind to listen, like Jim and Corey are saying. Thank you so much, Jim, for your time, Corey, and we thank very much Nicole Marder from Honduras for your perspectives. We're taking with us the fact that the critical role of local actors is that no one understands better what is happening. No one understands better their needs. No one has a more vested interest in things going for the better, like the people in the communities that we work. And as the administrator said, while we're facing global challenges, we have to work with local actors. So that is the importance of having sustainability through localization. Thank you so much for your perspectives. Thank you so much to the audience for their questions and for attending this great panel. Have a great day.
Thank you. Take care.